Well, thank you, Mr. President. I have two words for today: crack pipes. Crack pipes, not crack pots. Many of us went to bed last night, others waking up this morning, and heads are exploding across this nation as we learn that this administration is giving crack pipes to crack heads. I think when the history books are written about this president and 2020 through 24, that'll be the picture right next to the president's name, a picture of crack pipes being given out by this administration. I want to come back to that in a second, though. I have a picture of my dad today and our dog, Rennie. My dad and our family, my mom, an older brother, a younger sister, moved off the family farm when I was 5, and my dad was a proud police officer. And I remember the day in kindergarten when my dad and our family dog, Rennie, came to visit, and what a proud moment it was for me. In 3 years, my dad was head of the fire department, and 2 years after that, he became the chief of police. My dad was the chief of police in El Dorado, Kansas, for some 25 years. My dad represented law in the community. He represented right from wrong, and he applied that law equally. There was never a gray area for my dad. I remember having dinner at my grandma's house one Sunday evening, and the phone ringing. We didn't have pagers, we didn't have cell phones, and all I remember my dad was saying, "Stand down." And my grandma looked at us and said, "You guys better hug your dad goodbye." And I said, "Grandma, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, he may not come back." And it was a familiar story of a domestic violence, of a drunk husband with his wife on the front porch, and there was always a 12-gauge shotgun. That was never a 16-gauge or a 20, it was always a 12-gauge shotgun. And my dad was the person that would go and disarm that person. And it happened way too often, but I just tell that story just as we reminisce, as we know how important law enforcement officers are to all of us. And I remember, you sit around, you listen while you're making homemade ice cream, and people ask my dad questions about crime. And I think to those crack pipes, and my dad always saying that drugs and crime go hand in hand. Like peanut butter and jelly, the more drug abuse there is, the more crimes there were in the community. And I remember somebody asking him, why would the police officers be so strict about petty crimes? Maybe it was a little vandalism, maybe it was a broken window, maybe it was graffiti. I remember my dad talking about, you have to set an example. That if you allow people to vandalize, if you allow people to do graffiti, if you allow people to break windows, it's just a cascade of bigger crimes. We finished up some town halls this past weekend, 15 town halls in the past 2 weeks. And what Americans are concerned about is inflation and crime. And this is what Americans, Kansans, are telling me that they're seeing live out every night on their television set. They're seeing 2 million people, maybe 6 million people cross our border illegally. And they see this administration reward them with an all-expenses-paid vacation trip to any city in America. America has seen riots and vandalism on television, and this administration and his party applaud them. Every night we see looting and shoplifting, but this administration says don't prosecute. Last year, America saw 5 tons of fentanyl cross the border illegally, cross our southern border, 5 tons. So think of 5 big semi-trucks loaded with a ton, that's 2,000 pounds of fentanyl. And I remind everybody, 1 teaspoon of fentanyl can kill 2,000 to 3,000 Americans. We're seeing our law enforcement officers being told to turn their back on violent crimes, to not chase the bad guys. America sees this White House and their party turn their back on law enforcement officers. And again, I go back to my dad. I remember it was probably around 2014, and my dad and I were fishing, as we often do together, probably crappie fishing on a farm pond in the Flint Hills of Kansas, my favorite place to be. And my dad saying to me, "You know, son, I don't think that this president has the back of our law enforcement officers anymore. And as I visit with those law enforcement officers every time I'm back, and I appreciate them coming to my town halls and having my back, but I can tell you that law enforcement officers across this country do not feel like they're being supported by this White House. As I think about an America of today versus growing up, I do think there's been a decay in our culture. And this defund the police movement from the radical left has made that culture even weaker. We have members of the squad wanting to close federal prisons. They encourage open borders. They want illegals to use arrest warrants to get through the TSA. And of course, they want criminals to get off the hook. There's this culture of lawlessness. And again, I go back to my generation of this: if it feels good, do it. I remember that saying for the first time on a song, I believe, from the early 1970s. If it feels good, do it. And that's the way this country is acting right now. And what's the result? We see crowds chanting, "Pigs in a blanket, fry them up like bacon." Pigs in a blanket, fry them up like bacon. You know, the next time one of those houses is burning down that one of those people live in, I wonder who they're going to call. Or if they're stranded in a motor vehicle accident, who's going to be the first one on the scene? And again, I go back to thinking about my dad and him carrying out one of my classmates in second grade from a fire. And unfortunately, my classmate didn't make it. 346 law enforcement officers shot in 2021. 73 were intentional. 24 officers shot last month, a 40% increase. Ambush-style attacks increased 115%. We've never seen a crime wave like this across our nation, not since the early 1990s anyway. The United States recently saw the fastest increase in murder rate ever recorded. Violent crime spiked. 14 major Democrat-run cities setting all-time highs for homicide records. The numbers continue to go up. As I think about advice for this administration, I know if they had the will, they could fix this problem. I know exactly what my dad would tell them. He would say, treat criminals like criminals. Treat police officers, law enforcement officers like heroes. Tell them thanks. Reward them. Respect them. It's time to refund the police, folks. It's time to secure the border. Let's hold criminals accountable. It was a rare day, but I would remember my dad talking at the supper table about someone they'd worked so hard to convict, but a judge or a DA letting them off easy. We need to prosecute the smallest of crimes. We need an attorney general. Where is our attorney general? Where is he? In the middle of this crime spree, where is our attorney general? He needs to be tough on crime instead of labeling parents as domestic terrorists. And simply, America, it's time to get back to our values, the same values that my dad raised us on. It's time, like my dad did, apply the law equally. Thank you so much, Mr. President. I yield back.